Radhika. So we have a very exciting panel here. Like Radhika said, we're going to be talking about these real-world use cases by people that are working either with projects, and so they are actually building out real-world use cases and deploying them, or they are vendors that have a broad array of different customers that they work with, or they're building out ecosystem. So with that, I think what we'll do is we'll just go down the path here, and each person will introduce themselves. I'll just start from the end and just give a very high level about who is here. So Joe Vander Zanden from Consensys. If you're familiar with Ethereum, Consensys is kind of like a parent organization of the entire Ethereum ecosystem, and Joe will obviously be able to say a little bit more about that. Then we have Gangesh Ganesan. He's with Peernova, and they're in the fintech space, and they've been doing solutions since 2013. We have Mark Rakhmilevich. He's a director at Oracle, and he is very much focused on the blockchain space and is working on dozens of projects. And Srinivasan Sriram from Skuchain, and focused on supply chain finance. Myself, I'm Jorden Woods, and I'm with both StarChain Ventures, the same company that Radhika talked about, as well as Double Nova Group, and we have a blockchain fund, as well as we do advisory. So with that very high level, maybe we'll just go back to Joe, and if you can give us a little bit more insight, that would be great.
Sure. Can you guys, okay, you can hear me. Thought I had to push something. So as Jorden said, my name's Joe Vander Zanden. I help lead business development and alliances for Consensys Solutions, which is one of three pillars of the company. The company, as Jorden points out, is tasked with growing the Ethereum ecosystem. Our founder, Joe Lubin, is one of the co-founders of Ethereum, and he's the largest individual owner of Ether in the world. And about 6 months after Ethereum went live in 2015, he launched Consensys. And so Solutions is a team that focuses on bringing blockchain technology to enterprises, governments, NGOs. We also have Consensys Academy, which does training, non-technical and technical, and then finally capital to help invest in entrepreneurs.
Thanks. My name is Ganesh Mason. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Peernova. We're a Silicon Valley-based startup based here in San Jose. We founded the company in 2013. I'd like to say just a little before Ethereum was founded. When we started the company, we had an interesting journey. We mined Bitcoins, and we were one of the largest mining networks in the world. We built the largest mining network in North America. Had at that time over 10 megawatts of power and thousands of machines that were mining Bitcoins. And we sort of bootstrapped and started this company from that. Today we are focused singularly on the fintech space. Very specifically, we look to solve some of the problems that Radhika alluded to, clearance and settlement, and broadly within the financial space. We have two of the largest institutions in the world who are production deployed with our platform. One of them is the largest custodial bank in the world that clears about $4 trillion a day using our platform. And the second is one of the largest banks. It's a multinational bank in multiple trades that'll go live in November. We're doing more testing with them on it. We're about 55 people and have had an interesting journey, and happy to share our vision and our journey here today with Thai folks.
Hey everybody, my name is Mark Rakhmilevich. I'm Senior Director of Product Management, responsible at Oracle for our blockchain cloud platform. We've actually announced, I think last October at Oracle Open World, and started an early access and beta program that grew to around 60 customers and partners, all in enterprise space. And just in July, I think July 10th, July 11th, actually went GA, had a general availability announcement. with a number of customers that are using the platform. And so I get to speak with a lot of them and work with them on the early projects they're using the platform in across many industries, from financial services to transportation, logistics, automotive, healthcare, public sector, distribution, you name it. There is a lot of interest there, and happy to share some of those examples with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sriram. I'm the founder and CEO at Skuchain. We started early 2015. We have actually 3 issued patents in this space. We've Vitalik of Ethereum fame as an investor in our company. We hosted the first crypto economic conference. We, as a platform, help large buyers and sellers lower their cost of goods, increase the agility and visibility into their supply chain.
Wonderful. And so I'll just say for myself that I actually started out as an astrophysicist. And so I'm pretty technical. Really love that blockchain is a math-based system. And if you really get into it, if you like mathematics, Merkle trees, and zero knowledge proof, there's a lot of excitement in terms of read Vitalik as well. He writes some very technical papers, and so anybody who really wants to look at the mathematical side, this is real. You can't get more real than math. At least, that's a physicist inside me speaking. So this is not a scam, and all these use cases that we're going to be talking about really prove this as a foundational element that is going to disrupt and take over all the different processes that exist in enterprises, both existing and future, from a foundational level. Obviously, we're going to build on it. So let me get to the questions. So the first question that I would like to ask the different panelists here is, so when you are looking at blockchain, give me like 2 or 3 specific problems that you have seen, say with your business or with companies that you work with, that would be very difficult or nearly impossible to solve without a blockchain system. And we can start, anywhere.
Start with Sku. It's fine.
Okay.
So, track and trace is commonly talked about, and you have a lot of people, when they talk about blockchain, claim track and trace. When you really get down to it and you talk to people in this world of supply chain who understand the problem, it's not that they don't understand why the problem exists, it's that to solve it requires that you go deep into the supply chain and incentivize that supplier to share some information, because he really doesn't want to share it, because his business is at stake, cost that he can command in the market is at stake. The obfuscation and the cryptography of the blockchain is and leveraging that, attaching a business model to it, bringing it to market, I think is where a significant opportunity lies.
Wonderful.
So great. I'll talk about one. And sort of broadly, if you sort of think about, any kind of trade or a transfer that happens between 2 financial institutions, and sort of at the foundation of how any kind of asset is transferred in the world. Say if I want to send money to India or somewhere else in the world, I work with a bank, and eventually there's a corresponding bank, and finally the destination bank gets the money. So a lot of the core underpinnings of the financial system involve banks and various financial institutions having to send messages to each other and share data of various types with each other. And it so happens that this is an interesting piece of information. A bank like Citi, which is one of the largest financial institutions in the world, in their middle and back office have over 80,000 software engineers. 80,000 software engineers. I mean, that probably is bigger than the number of people that are working at Google, which is one of the largest software companies. So what are 80,000 software engineers at Citi doing? right? It kind of tells you the scale of the complexity today of the existing workflows in some of these financial institutions. Literally tens of thousands of people are in the financial world who are actually doing various middle and back office operations. And it so happens that blockchains and distributed ledger technologies are offering a far more elegant, simpler, easier way to share data, to understand what we call event lineage of the data. How do you automatically reconcile the data across tens, hundreds, thousands of systems that are distributed across the financial institutions? So this we think is one of the key applications for blockchain technology within the financial services space.
Mark, go ahead.
So we have seen a lot of different types of use cases, different scenarios across many industries, but I think the intersections, the most interesting one to me is between the supply chain and financial system, because there is so much happening that is today very problematic. There is a huge amount of fraud that's actually occurring in receivables financing, supply chain financing space. Banks recognize it. They want to be able to solve that problem in a way that's decentralized, that allows them to share some minimal amount of data. Obviously, there's a lot of competitive threats and so on. They don't want to share that. But what they want to be able to do is bring some capability to share the information that is on the cusp between the companies selling and buying and the banks providing the financing. That takes different forms. There are bank-formed consortia. There are consortia that are being formed outside of banks, with banks participating. So we see a lot of interest in that particular area. And it, by necessity, because we're talking about supply chain, we're talking about transportation, logistics involved as part of that, we're talking about financing. So it spreads actually into a much broader ecosystem.
Yeah, I think I can add to that. I mean, so one of the unique things about my role in relation to maybe some of the others on the panel is that we have a pretty broad mandate at Consensys. So I've spoke with companies, much like Mark, across industry. And I think to add value to the comments that were made, there's some common kind of Platonic abstracts that come up over and over. If you're talking about, you know, medical records, or you're talking about supply chains or whatever, a lot of the time when we're engaged in a conversation, the organizations we're talking to are predominantly interested in two things. First, test driving the blockchain internally to see if they can drive business process optimization. So get rid, to summarize what some of you guys are saying, get rid of a lot of people and paperwork that currently exists today by having a trust layer and a shared ledger, and then automating a lot of stuff using smart contracts. And then secondly, some of the more progressive, for lack of a better term, companies we're talking to are saying, after that, we can deploy this. How can we go disrupt our own business models? I know that's a little foreign to the enterprise, but in the context, but quite a few enterprises I've talked to, some of their more ambitious leadership is saying, if this stuff works like you guys say it's going to work, how can we go back and look at our own business model, their own customers, and take a look at that and disrupting that. So I would just add that to the comments.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up on what Joe is saying. And so if you look at, you know, internet, it's really TCP/IP is the foundational protocol. It's really a messaging service. And so there's really no trust layer, right? That had to be overlaid, right? HTTPS and certificate authorities and things like this have come in after the base was built. So what you actually get with blockchain is this trustless, the ability to have a trust layer, which enables trustless transactions. This is why we talk a lot about competitors. Radhika was talking about competitors working together. These are people that don't trust each other, and there are a lot of different groups that would like to do business, work together, but they can't. They need a trusted intermediary. And, you know, the trusted intermediary comes in, they have one set of books, the other parties have a different set of books. And so you get a lot of inefficiency, you get higher costs, you get more time. And so this trust layer really helps to disrupt a lot of that, and it creates this novel opportunity for more companies and startups to do what we're starting to see, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so with that, I'd like to ask another question, which is, you know, we've heard a lot about public chains. How many of you have heard of public blockchains? You know, okay, Ethereum, Bitcoin, etc. How many of you have heard of permission chains? Okay, good. So we have about an equal number. So something that's quite common in enterprises is something called a permission chain. And so I'd just like to ask the panel, from your perspective, do you think that for what you're doing, a permissioned or a permissionless kind of blockchain network is better, not just for you, but maybe for your customers? So we'll just start with Sriram.
So we think the world will be a network of networks. Large organizations will have private / permissioned networks, which may interoperate with other private networks and potentially some public networks. I think it's going to be a world of different blockchains, different permission structures of these blockchains. The best way to think of it is internet and intranets and how web servers communicate with HTTP. There was an early ILP type escrowing mechanism. There are various protocols like Cosmos or talking about interchain compatibility. We build blockchain agnostic middleware so we can sort of bridge across different blockchains, both of similar variety and different varieties.
Great. Mark?
So from the customers that I work with, I think vast majority, and maybe perhaps every single one, is using a permissioned blockchain because they really need to know who they're doing business with. They need to have some legal recourse at the end of the day if something goes wrong. They need to be able to invite members to participate. A notion of a public blockchain that has anonymous participation doesn't fit most of the enterprise use cases. However, what I think is going to be happening in the space is today we have different technology stacks, right? If you want a public blockchain, you go and use something like maybe a Bitcoin derivative, like a multi-chain, or you have Ethereum derivatives, etc. If you want a permissioned blockchain, you use Hyperledger, or maybe use Quorum, which is kind of a variation on Ethereum, and they're completely separate stacks. I think what we're beginning to see is some capabilities from each one sipping towards each other so that you have some hybrid capabilities. We have a permission network. Maybe you would have the people who are allowed to update and write, still permissioned entities, legally identified, have certificates, but there is broader read-only access to some notion of public, could be customers of a particular organization, could be broader, could be citizens of a state, for example, etc. And the technology, I think, is going to follow the use cases. Today, it's completely separate stacks. Within 2 years, I think we're going to begin to see both sets of capabilities available in most of the technologies, and it's going to be the question of turning the knob to see exactly how you want to configure it, what aspects should be permissioned, what should be more public, and the degree of authentication and identity management that's required for different types of tasks. And so it's going to be, the capabilities for both are going to be available, I think, in all of the major stacks.
So obviously, financial use cases for most financial institutions, it's a highly regulated industry, and so privacy is of key concern. Lots of regulations about, know your customer and other very specific, laws that are in place. So clearly, that leads to, some type of a permission solution that is somewhat private or private amongst a group of financial institutions is what most people are trying out. But the other thing that we want to emphasize is that the world is not just going to be blockchains. There's going to be other types of technologies, networks that are already in place that will continue to be in place. So blockchains need to not just interact with other blockchains, but blockchains need to interact with existing systems. There's vast amounts of infrastructure that's already been built. I'll give you an idea. On a given day globally, there's $160 trillion worth of assets in some fashion moving amongst various accounts. Just to kind of give you a perspective, the US GDP per year is $20 trillion. On every day, though, $160 trillion is moving amongst various institutions. Yes. And pretty much none of it is actually moving through blockchains. Right. So for the foreseeable future, the world is going to be filled with lots and lots of systems that are going to be based on various existing technologies. One could call them legacies. Some of them are even new technologies. Things like AI, deep learning, machine learning are all running today on big data platforms that are not blockchain. So it is important to kind of keep in perspective that blockchains are one of the components in all of the industries we're talking about, financial services, supply chain, and others. So these technologies that we're building need to sort of interoperate with existing systems And so, the concept of privacy, permission, private systems are, even broader than just simply saying in the context of the blockchains.
Great. Joe?
Yeah, I think for the foreseeable future, the panel's correct. And I think the Byzantine was the word that came to my mind when I was listening to him. That interoperability is a big issue, not just between blockchains, not just between configurations that are permissioned and public permissionless. However, I think that's the short run. I think in the long run, the one differentiator, irrespective of the data structure, whether it's a blockchain or a DAG or whatever it ends up being, these distributed ledgers, they are the foundation upon which you can build all these other technologies, assuming scale is achieved, including machine learning and other things. And I stole that from Don Tapscott at Dell Technologies World, but I think he made the point when he was doing a presentation that blockchain, or whatever you want to call it underneath, these shared ledgers can be theoretically a platform to build a completely new architecture for a lot of these solutions. Secondly, and just to add, a lot of the opportunity as well is that with these technologies, we may get into this later, but we're going to drive down transaction costs. So Ronald Coase is a famous economist. He wrote a paper when he was 24 on the nature of the firm. So we presuppose large corporations are going to exist forever. Theoretically, these technologies could be potentially disruptive vectors to the idea of a large corporation, because the transaction costs come down such to the point that you can decentralize organizations as well. So I'll just be here to provide these little comments all day.
That was great. So there you have it. There's, I think, sort of the summary of that is that this is really a foundational technology that you're going to build a lot of other stuff on top of. So it's not everything in one box. It's really a new foundational layer that provides trust, and so can do a lot of interesting things. And then in the enterprise, you're seeing right now a lot of very much more of a focus on permission chains, which means pretty much that all the nodes are known to each other. And, you have KYC, AML to make sure that you basically build much more of like a trusted club, because that's the way businesses operate. And so we're not going to change that very quickly. Maybe it can become more open in time, but in terms of taking baby steps, this is really the near term. Okay, and I know we're probably running out of time. We just didn't have a lot of time for the panel. Obviously, we're going to have another conference or something where we talk about enterprise blockchain solutions. But what I'd like to ask each of the panelists is just maybe one use case, one case study. Let me just say one case study that you've been involved with. You don't have to necessarily name names, but that you're kind of proud of, or that helps to kind of exemplify the power of blockchain. So start with Sriram.
So there's a phrase called 3TG, that is tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. These are conflict minerals. Places like Rwanda, the DRC, and even Nevada generate some of them. So 3TG, tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold are conflict minerals. Places like Rwanda, the DRC, and even Nevada generate some of them. These items go into things like semiconductor chips. There's ore, it gets smelted, it gets transported, it gets refined, it gets contract manufactured, and it gets onto a chip. There are transformations that happen to it. There is money, there is commodity fluctuation, there is currency fluctuation. There are high interest rates, low interest rates, and we built a platform that helps solve some of this, and we think that's a pretty interesting use case.
I'll talk about one. We worked with one large global institution that had a problem that they broadly call the trade validation problem. So on a nightly basis, all the banks get various sort of feeds from other banks and from what are called clearing houses, someone like a DTCC or there are various other institutions, CME, ICE, Euroclear, London Clearing House. These are all people who clear various trades. So we worked with this large financial institution, and they had a workflow that had hundreds of systems and applications, and they had 2,500 people as part of one outsourcing vendor, and 4,000 people as part of a second outsourcing vendor, and about 2,000 people in their own institution. So about 8,000 people overall that were part of this workflow that were validating data coming from all these different feeds. There were about 30 or 40 feeds they were receiving, and they had these 8,000 people that were part of validating and verifying the data that comes into them on a daily basis. And we worked with this institution for a few months to put our platform in, and they have now automated this flow, and essentially they now realize that they can do a flow that took them 6 months to complete with this group of 8,000 people. They can get it done in a week or less. And they can do it with far fewer people. In fact, they can do it with less than 10% of the people that they were doing. They'll announce it in production in November, but we were very excited by the results they got and the validation of sort of the distributed ledger technology and all of these technologies that went into building this.
Great.
Sure. So one of my probably favorite use cases is in ocean freight shipping, maritime shipping area. We worked with a customer who's actually a software themselves, a software house. They're providing a lot of services and systems to a variety of ocean carriers. And they deal with all of the issues associated with tracking the documentation associated with shipping stuff, bills of lading, and all the documentations of the company's containers as it goes through the journeys, through customs and all of that. They work with 40 ocean carriers, thousands of freight forwarders, tens of thousands of shippers, and a bunch of subsidiary companies who basically are spokes in the shipping network, whether it's trains or trucks, whoever delivers to the port, picks up from the port, and so on. So it's a huge, huge network. They are in the process of creating a consortium with ocean shippers as the founders. So there's a number of ocean shippers coming together, and they're going to essentially use the blockchain capability to automate, capture, and monitor the process of documentation to ensure that all of the different materials and documents that have to be supplied by all of the participants are done on time, that they're accurate, and that they can be collected and grouped properly when they actually go through the inspections before the ship leaves the port to ensure there are no dangerous goods, or dangerous goods are treated appropriately, comply with particular locations, etc. I learned a lot about how you pack containers in a couple of visits to the customer, actually. Things which are likely to expose, supposed to be on the very top, so if they do, you can throw them overboard. But if you don't know that they are in a particular container, and that container is down in the hull, it could take the whole ship down. So tracking a lot of that material is very important. They are expecting to have a number of participants in this consortium and saving hundreds of millions of dollars across the industry using blockchain technology essentially to provide this real-time sharing for all of the participants.
Joe?
Yeah, I think here I can provide a little bit of a unique perspective too. So we have over 53 portfolio companies, so I get to see a lot of different use cases. In the ones, I mean, we have a supply chain platform named Buy-in. It's used by major CPG companies I can't name because these founders are autonomous and I represent the hub, but they're working with some pretty large companies there. Music, identity to me is a really important area. So we have a portfolio company called Uport that's working on identity projects in Dubai and Singapore, Switzerland, where citizens can actually control their identity as well as being online, control your identity. But my favorite use cases that I can talk about are ones where we pull multiple of our portfolio companies in to create a solutions architecture that's kind of end-to-end decentralized and redefines an entire user experience. Could be a citizen operating in a city, or it could be a how you purchase music. But that's where I see the magic come together for Consensys, because we're not just a single point solution. We have we're representing a large number of entrepreneurs that are building different decentralized applications.
Wow. So there you have it. I mean, we have this one panel, and we have blockchain being used for conflict minerals. We have maritime shipping. It could be process automation, and then identity and rights management. So you can tell all your friends who say that Bitcoin is the only use case that there's actually quite a few more. And we just have 4 people here talking about a few of them. So there's actually many, many use cases. Radhika gave a high level. What I'd like to do is probably just open it up for a question or two. We only have a couple minutes left. And so it looks like we have one question in the back. Do we have a microphone that we can bring back? Or maybe you can just speak up loudly? Okay.
I would like to go back to the basics first, because I'm kind of novice in the topic. We hear about 3 other technology names like DLT for the ledger, smart contract, consensus, and there are various ways to achieve consensus. And I feel my question is, are these pieces of blockchain, or do they, each one of them is just another word for blockchain? Because the literature is quite confusing, and I want to know your opinion about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a cut at it, because we sort of went through an evolution. The word blockchain sort of started broadly getting used, 4 or 5 years ago. Last couple of years, I would say distributed ledgers have been used. And the idea behind a distributed ledger is sort of its original evolution, at least, came from sort of these permission networks, and being able to verify and validate events that go on in one participant by other participants, or maybe all of them. So it's sort of one use case model for broadly what the industry is called blockchains, is the DLT. Consensus, of course, is sort of the ultimate, is ultimately something along the lines of what are the rules by which the participants, whether it's a fully open network or it's open only to the members, how are they agreeing to sort of the validity of the data that they're all holding as part of their ledger. So consensus is sort of the name given to sort of the protocols that are used for coming to that cryptographic agreement that what we have is valid and can be validated and verified by others. So that is sort of the evolution of these terms from our perspective, but maybe people have other perspectives on these terms. But some of these terms are used in different ways, at least blockchains and DLT. They're somewhat used interchangeably in some context by some people.
Yeah, and I'll just say that if you're interested in these more basic questions, go to Medium. If you're familiar with Medium, there's quite a lot. Hacker Noon has a lot of different articles. I know Consensys has a bunch as well. But I probably can take one more question. Let's see, who is second? Maybe in the middle here? Oh, okay. I don't know if it's working.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm working with a startup, and one of the...
It's fine, I can hear you. No problem.
And what we want to do is build a portal for disaster events.
Oh, wow.
And one of the functionalities is to integrate government databases into a blockchain. And a friend told me, from perspective, that blockchain is a universal database. I thought that was pretty good.
Sure.
But if we can integrate how do we incentivize government departments and silos that are all in different databases to share their data? That's something I want to know.
So I think he nailed a question we didn't have time for, which we didn't really talk about, which is incentives. I think these technologies come to life, and I have a bias of an economics background, based on the incentive systems. A lot of this technology has been in the market since before I was born. It's really bringing it all together and creating incentives that get people who don't know each other, at least in the open network context, to participate. And one of the things I'll say at a very high level is that a lot of these pilots on these permission blockchains have issues with participation. So if you can solve that problem, it's from my perspective a very valuable problem to solve, and we're thinking about it as well at Consensys. I mean, about permission blockchains, as has been mentioned here, are going to continue to be an important component, and we need to understand how we can get participation in the permission world on an ongoing basis and in a consortium context as effectively as we can out on a permissionless blockchain.
Yeah, so a very good question, and tokens are the high-level answer.
I would just add maybe, this is a quick comment in terms of, if you're looking at it from an enterprise perspective, not so much governments, public sector, slightly different because they have different incentives. But there are two things that always work in an enterprise conversation: reduce costs and increase your revenue. So there has to be some way to tie in the value of using blockchain to one of those two, or maybe a combination of them in some form, shape, or factor. Tokens are not necessary as long as you can show one of those two.
Yeah. I don't think we have any more time. We'll be around. Or is everyone going to stay around just maybe a little bit longer? So yeah, we have a really exciting panel that is going to come next with investors, and Radhika will be leading that one. So we're going to make way for a panel that is mostly women, which is kind of,
very nice.
We're mostly men. So thank you to everyone.